My daughter-in-law sneered at my son as he entered the courtroom, but when the judge saw me walk in behind him, he stopped and muttered in disbelief, "Why are you here?" The entire room fell silent while my daughter-in-law and her arrogant family looked at each other in a panic. I'm glad you're here. If you're watching this video, give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening to my revenge story from. I want to know how far it has reached. The noise in the courtroom died down instantly when Judge Stephen Morales entered. He sat in the main seat, his piercing eyes scanning the room. When he looked at Michael, my son, I saw a flicker of compassion in his gaze, but then he froze, fixing his eyes on me. I felt the shock in that look, as if he were seeing a ghost from the past. I walked slowly toward the defense table. I placed my old leather briefcase on the wooden surface. The sharp thud echoed like a declaration of war. I pulled out the chair and sat next to Michael, feeling my son's trembling hand under mine. The room was plunged into silence. The only sound was the scratching of the clerk's pen on paper. Judge Morales leaned forward, his eyes wide, his usual solemnity gone. His lips moved, and he said almost in a whisper, "Why did you come here?" That question was like a blast of cold wind sweeping through the room. Jessica frowned, looking at me with suspicion. Her parents whispered to each other, their eyes full of distrust. Michael lifted his head, his gaze confused, but holding a fragile spark of hope. Seeing him like that, my heart ached. He didn't know. No one in that room knew that I wasn't just a mother. I had been someone else, someone that everyone in Chicago knew and called by name. Less than an hour before, the Chicago sky was gray and heavy. I stood by the car, carefully helping Michael with each step. His steps were shaky, not just because of the wooden crutch bearing his weight, but also because of the cold stares of the crowd that fell upon us. The bells of the church in the nearby downtown square rang each mournful toll, hitting my chest, announcing a grim day. I clutched the old leather briefcase in my hands, its worn edges reminding me of the years gone by. It didn't just hold papers, it held the honor, the future, and the faint hope of my family. In front of the imposing courthouse steps, a small crowd had gathered, some curious neighbors, some reporters with cameras ready. They murmured a buzz like a restless swarm. "It's the Villaseñor divorce," someone whispered. "They say it's really nasty. Poor son." I heard it with a sinking heart, but I kept my face cold, not showing any weakness. Then a luxury car pulled up sharply behind us. The door opened and Jessica got out. She wore a red Gucci dress the color of defiance, as if screaming to the world that she was the winner. Dark sunglasses covered half her face, but they couldn't hide the arrogant smile on her lips. Her parents and her brother followed her, heads held high, walking as if they already had victory in their hands. Seeing them made my stomach turn. They didn't know what Michael and I had been through, the sleepless nights, the days of struggle to keep this home. I motioned for Michael to walk ahead, and I followed him silently. My son, once a strong man, now leaned on crutches, his back hunched as if carrying the weight of the world. Every step he took was like a knife in my heart. I wanted to scream to protect him from those pitying looks, but I could only grip the briefcase tighter and walk with a forced calm. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick, the smell of old wood mixing with tension. Jessica was already sitting on the defendant's bench, legs crossed, her bright red heels, tapping the floor, each tap-tap like a taunt. When Michael struggled in, she smiled contemptuously and leaned into her mother's ear, just loud enough for everyone to hear. "Look, he's nothing but a crippled old man." I felt my blood boil, but I bit my lip to keep the rage from exploding. Michael lowered his head, his chest heaving. He sat silently in the wooden chair for the plaintiff, his hands gripping his crutches as if they were his last support. Seeing my son like this tore my heart apart. He was the child I had sacrificed my whole life for, the one who had promised to build us a home where no one could ever kick us out. And now he was here, humiliated by the same woman who claimed to love him. Jessica's lawyer, Jennifer Rivers, stood up and placed a thick stack of papers on the table. Her arrogant voice echoed through the room. "We will demonstrate that my client's husband, Michael Villaseñor, is no longer capable of fulfilling his duties as a husband and a father." Every word was like a hammer blow to my chest. I wanted to stand up, to scream that they were lying, that Michael was still a father, a dignified man, even if his legs were no longer healthy. But I remained silent, waiting for my moment. The dense air of the courtroom took me back to days past. Years ago, when the golden sun still bathed the stone streets, my small family knew peaceful days. Our little house, though humble, was always filled with laughter. I remember those weekend afternoons when Michael was 7, running through the yard with an old ball in his hand, singing at the top of his lungs the pop songs I taught him. My husband David was still a family man, then sitting on the porch smoking, watching his son play with a serene smile. But that peace, I later discovered, was nothing more than a fleeting dream. One night, when the aroma of the pot roast I had prepared still lingered in the kitchen, David put down his knife and fork, his gaze icy. "Linda," he said in a monotone voice, as if reading an announcement, "I'm leaving. I have another life." I stood there, spoon in hand, stunned, as if I'd been slapped. He didn't look at me, just got up, took the suitcase he already had packed, and walked out the door. A gleaming car was waiting for him outside. Inside, under the streetlight, I could barely make out a woman, a wealthy widow, who I later learned had stolen the man of my life from me. Michael, who was 10 at the time, stood frozen in the doorway, his eyes wide open, watching his father's figure disappear. The sound of the engine fading away left a silence that broke my soul. That night, after clearing the table, as if nothing had happened, I went into Michael's room. The boy was huddled under the covers, his shoulders trembling with muffled sobs. I sat beside him. I drew him into my arms, but I didn't cry. I couldn't cry. I told myself I had to be a rock strong so my son would have something to hold on to. "Mom, why did Dad leave?" he asked in a broken voice. I just hugged him tighter and whispered, "I don't know, son, but I promise you that you and I will always be together." I kept that promise with all my heart. Although every night when he slept, I would be alone in the kitchen staring at the clean plates with a pain that pierced through me. The following years were a relentless cycle. In the mornings, I'd get up early, make breakfast for Michael, and take him to school on my old bicycle. During the day, I worked as an office clerk, my eyes fixed on the keyboard, checking numbers, trying to keep my boss from noticing the dark circles from my sleepless nights. At night, while Michael did his homework, I would sit at the dining room table, hunched over the accounting books of some neighborhood stores. There were nights of heavy rain when Michael and I shared a broken umbrella, walking through flooded streets to get home. With my clothes soaked and the cold chilling my bones, I still squeezed my son's hand and smiled at him. "We're stronger than this rain, aren't we?" Michael would nod, and his smile was the only light in those dark days. I never told Michael about the nights I didn't sleep thinking about tuition rent or medicine. Once, when he had a fever, I had to search pharmacies in the middle of the night with only a few coins in my pocket. At the counter, I counted the money one by one, my heart sinking at the thought of having to choose between my son's medicine or the next day's food. But I didn't give up. Every time I looked at Michael, I told myself I couldn't fall because he was the reason for my existence. The day Michael received his acceptance letter for electrical engineering, I stood still in the kitchen, the paper in my hand, crying uncontrollably. It was the first time in years I cried with happiness, but the joy soon turned to worry. College was not something I could easily afford. Silently, I took my wedding ring, the last memory of a broken marriage, from the old wooden chest. It was the only thing of value left in the house. I took it to the pawn shop, and watching the owner weigh the ring squeezed my soul. "Mom, you don't have to do that," Michael said when he found out his eyes red. "I'll get a job. I interrupted him, putting my hand on his shoulder. "You just need to study hard. I want you to do what I never could." Michael hugged me, and for the first time, I felt he was no longer a child who needed my protection. Michael didn't let me down. After years of effort and study, he built a 2-story house on the outskirts of Chicago. The day he handed me the keys, I stood in front of those new walls and cried. "Mom, I promised you," Michael said, smiling with a choked voice. "This is our house. No one can kick us out now." I hugged him, feeling in his body the sweat tears and love he had put into every brick. For the first time in a long time, I felt I had done the right thing by not giving up. When Michael married Jessica, I thought my family was finally complete. Jessica back then was a sweet girl with a smile as lovely as orange blossoms. In the beginning, she used to come into the kitchen with me cheerful, telling me her future plans with Michael. "Mom, I want to have lots of kids, so you'll have a big family of grandchildren," she told me once, and I believed her. I thought happiness had finally found us. I saw how Michael's eyes lit up whenever Jessica was near, and I silently thanked God for giving me such a daughter-in-law. But tragedy struck like a nightmare. An electric shock at the construction site, a fall from high scaffolding. I got the call at midnight, the foreman's trembling voice on the phone. "Mrs. Villaseñor Michael. He had an accident. Come to the hospital immediately." I ran out of the house, my heart racing, barefoot on the cold streets. When I arrived, the image of Michael, motionless, wrapped in white bandages, was seared into my memory. I stayed there by his side, watching the son who had been the pillar of our family reduced to a being as fragile as a child. "I'm here, Michael," I whispered, squeezing his hand. "Mom is here with you." The following months were a chain of endless days. Michael recovered slowly, but his legs were never the same. The doctor said he would have to live with wooden crutches for the rest of his life. From a strong, always smiling and talkative man, Michael became a silent shadow. He spoke less, and his gaze was often filled with sadness. Every time I saw him leaning on his crutches, taking hesitant steps in the yard, I felt like someone was tearing my heart out. When Michael came back from the hospital, I felt like the whole world had changed. The 2-story house my son had built with so much pride, which used to be filled with laughter, was now as silent as a tomb. I rearranged the living room, turning it into a downstairs space, so Michael could move around more easily. Every time I looked at the simple bed I prepared for him, my soul ached. That room had been planned by Michael and Jessica as the future playroom for their children, but now it was just a makeshift refuge for a man fighting his own body. The first few weeks, Jessica still pretended to be a devoted wife. She would bring him a bowl of hot soup in his room, serve his medicine carefully, and even smile when I thanked her. I wanted to believe she still loved Michael, that she was just trying to adapt to the new situation. But with each passing day, I realized it was all a facade. Jessica's patience ran out at a speed that astonished me. One early morning, as the first light came through the window, I saw Michael sitting in his wheelchair, a rare sparkle in his eyes. "Mom, I want to go to the garden today," he said with a voice full of enthusiasm. "I want to breathe some fresh air. Can you call Jessica to help me?" I nodded, relieved to see my son finding a small reason for joy. I went to the kitchen where Jessica was making coffee, dressed as if she were getting ready to go out. "Jessica, Michael wants to go to the garden. Can you help your husband a little?" I asked, trying to keep my voice gentle. She turned around with a frown and an annoyed face. "Mother-in-law, I have a mountain of things to do," she replied in a cold tone. "Can't he manage on his own for a bit?" Without waiting for my reaction, she slammed the coffee cup on the table and stormed out, leaving me there motionless. I returned to the room and saw Michael still by the window, his gaze downcast and his hands gripping the edges of the wheelchair. "Mom, it doesn't matter anymore. Forget it," he whispered, almost inaudibly. I wanted to run after Jessica to scream in her face, but seeing Michael, I could only push his chair toward the garden, forcing a smile to hide the pain that was breaking me inside. Family meals, which used to be the warmest time of the day, had now become a difficult trial. I tried hard to cook the dishes Michael liked most, like chili or homemade soup, hoping to bring back a little joy. But Jessica would sit there, eat barely a bite, and then put down her cutlery, muttering that she had no appetite. I still remember how she used to praise my stuffed bell peppers, how she would laugh, saying she wanted to learn how to cook them for Michael. Now instead, she looked at her husband with obvious annoyance, as if sharing a table with him was a sacrifice. "Jessica, are you feeling unwell?" I once asked, trying to keep a calm atmosphere. She just shrugged and muttered, "No, I'm just not hungry." But I knew well that it wasn't the food that took away her appetite, but Michael and this whole family. Once, as I was passing through the kitchen to get some water, I heard Jessica's voice through the slightly open door. She was talking on the phone, her voice low but full of calculation. "Don't worry, as long as the house is split in two, we'll have enough capital to start over." I froze my heart tight, as if someone was squeezing it. The house. the house that Michael had built with sweat and tears, the house whose key he handed me with the pride of a son. Now it was becoming prey in her plan. I wanted to push the door open and confront her immediately, but I held back. I needed time. I needed proof. I needed to protect Michael from this cruel truth, at least for now. Jessica started to change on the outside, too. The simple dresses from before were replaced by expensive, tight, sparkling ones. Her lipstick was brighter, her perfume so strong that I had to open the windows every time she passed by. She went out frequently at night with excuses like a reunion with old friends or going out to relax for a while. I would watch her leave her heels clacking loudly against the floor, and my heart would sink. I remembered the days when she still held Michael's hand, smiling radiantly as they talked about their future. Now, every time she left, I felt she was not only leaving Michael behind, but also the promises that once made me trust her. The neighbors' rumors started to reach me. One afternoon, while buying vegetables at the market, Mrs. Davis, the usual vendor, pulled me by the arm and whispered, "Linda, I don't want to speak ill, but lately I've been seeing your daughter-in-law a lot with a strange man at the corner coffee shop. They're very affectionate, laughing and talking like a couple." I forced a smile and thanked her, but inside me, the suspicion had already turned into certainty. I didn't want to believe it, but the pieces were slowly fitting together. Jessica was no longer the girl I once considered a daughter. She had become a stranger with plans I didn't dare to face yet. The worst came one late night when pain was tormenting Michael. I heard him groan softly in his room and call out in a weak voice, "Jessica, can you help me massage my leg a bit? It hurts so much." I stood outside the door, hoping for a gesture of tenderness from my daughter-in-law. But Jessica sharply pulled Michael's hand away, her voice sharp as a knife. "I'm not your nurse. If you need care, hire someone to look after you." I stood there, my hand clenched on the doorknob, feeling as if a dagger had been plunged into my chest. Michael fell silent. He didn't answer, but I knew those words had deeply wounded him. The house that once overflowed with laughter now sank into a thick silence. Every night I sat on the porch, listening to the crickets, my heart torn. I thought about the days when Michael was still healthy, when he would hug Jessica and say, "Mom, I found the person who will walk with me for the rest of my life." I had believed, I had hoped, that Jessica would bring my son happiness. But now the love in her eyes had died, leaving only contempt and calculation. Every time I looked at Michael with his wooden crutches and empty gaze, I felt I had failed not just as a mother, but as someone who believed in love and honesty. One gray afternoon with the sky covered in clouds, I had just put the water pitcher on the table when I heard the door open along with the clicking of heels on the floor. Jessica entered, but she wasn't alone. Beside her was Jennifer Rivers, whom I recognized immediately, an old acquaintance from my days in court, now back with a cold and distant look. Jennifer wore an impeccable black suit with a briefcase in her hand, walking with an air of power that seemed to want to dominate the entire room. I looked at her, and my heart shuddered as I remembered the days we sat together in the law office, sharing dreams about justice. Now she was on the other side, not even greeting me as if I were a stranger. Jessica, in a bright blue dress, sat in a chair without deigning to look at me or Michael. The atmosphere in the kitchen became tense, as if a storm was about to break. Jessica pushed a stack of papers towards Michael, her voice dry without a hint of emotion. "Sign here, we're getting a divorce. By law, this house has to be split in half." Those words were like a stab straight to the heart. I looked at Michael. His already pale face was now white as a sheet without a drop of blood. His hands trembled, gripping the edge of the table, as if trying to hold on to his last hope. I placed the glass of water on the table and tried to keep my voice calm, though inside rage was consuming me. "On what grounds do you say this house is common property?" Jessica lifted her chin with a face so brazen it made me want to jump out of my chair. "We are legally married. All assets acquired during the marriage are divided in half. Don't you know the law?" Her words were like a slap in the face, not just to me, but also to the years of sweat and tears Michael had put into building this house. I took a deep breath, contained my anger, and replied in a firm voice, "You're wrong, Jessica. This house is Michael's own property. It was purchased and is in his name before you two were married. Legally, you have no right to it." The atmosphere in the room froze. Michael lifted his head, and in his desperate eyes, a glimmer of hope appeared. Jennifer, sitting next to Jessica, intervened with a voice as sharp as a knife. "Mrs. Villaseñor, in marriage law in the United States, there are clauses that allow separate property to be considered marital property after several years of cohabitation. You should be careful what you say." I looked her straight in the eye, the one who used to sit with me in tense trials, the one who used to call me Linda with respect. Now she saw me as an enemy. I answered her word for word. "Jennifer, I know the law better than anyone here." The room fell into absolute silence. And then Michael looked at me surprised with a spark of pride I hadn't seen in him since he left the hospital. But Jessica wouldn't stop. She jumped up screaming in a shrill voice, "I don't care who you used to be. I just want to get rid of this burden. He's already an invalid, and I still have a future ahead of me." Those words fell on Michael like a hammer blow. He sat there silent, his shoulders trembling, his voice broken. "Jessica, do you really think that—" She looked away, not answering, and her silence was crueler than any word. I felt as if my heart was being ripped out. Michael, my son, the pride of my life, was now being called a burden by the woman he loved. I wanted to run to Jessica, slap her, scream that she didn't deserve my son's love. But I just stood there, my hands gripping the edge of the chair, fighting not to break down. Jennifer stood up and led Jessica out of the house, leaving the divorce petition on the table like a scar that could never be erased. The door slammed shut, and Michael and I were left in a deathly silence. I started to clear the dishes, trying to do something so I wouldn't have to face the pain that was crushing my chest, but my hands were trembling so much that I ended up breaking a porcelain bowl. The sound of the shattering glass echoed mournful like my heart at that moment. Michael was still sitting motionless, his empty gaze fixed on the divorce papers. "Mom," he murmured in a weak voice, "what did I do for her to change like this?" I didn't answer right away. I just sat next to him and put my hand on his shoulder. "You did nothing wrong," I said, my voice choked. "She's the one who's wrong, not you." But deep down, I knew the truth was even more painful. Jessica didn't just want to leave Michael. She wanted to take everything we had built. This house where Michael had put his sweat and tears to build it had now become the target of her cold plan. I thought of those days we walked through flooded streets of the wedding ring I sold to support Michael's dream of his promise to give me a home from which no one could ever kick us out. Now all of that was in danger not because of a stranger, but because of the very person Michael had called his wife. That night I sat alone on the porch, listening to the insects in the darkness. The cold wind blew, but I didn't feel cold. I knew the real storm was just beginning. In the days after the divorce papers were laid on the table, the air in the house became so heavy it felt like it was crushing my chest. Every corner of the house, from the wooden table where we used to laugh to the hallway where Michael walked steadily, was now just filled with icy silence. I looked at Michael, my son, eating his dinner in silence, his hands slow as he brought small bites to his mouth. He said nothing, just lowered his head, his thin back casting a long shadow on the floor as he returned to his room with his crutches. I wanted to run after him, hug him, tell him everything would be okay, but I knew those words of comfort would now be like passing wind, unable to calm his pain. That night, I tossed and turned in bed, unable to sleep. The faint moonlight filtered through the window, drawing weak lines on the ceiling. I thought of Michael, of all the years we had spent together, of the promise I had made to myself to protect him from all harm. But now it was the person he loved most who was breaking his heart. I felt helpless, as if all my years of struggle had been for nothing. Finally thirsty, I got up, put on a light jacket, and walked to the kitchen. As I passed the bedroom of Jessica and Sarah, my little granddaughter, I heard a murmur. Jessica's cold voice cut through the wooden door like a knife. "Sarah, listen carefully. Tomorrow in court, if the judge asks, you have to say that your daddy can't take care of you anymore. You have to say you don't want to live with a sick person. Understand?" Those words were like a dagger straight to my heart. I stood still, my hand gripping the glass, almost dropping it. Sarah's voice answered, weak and sobbing. But I don't want to lie, Mom. I love Daddy very much." Her voice trembled, as if she was trying to hold on to the little love left in her innocent heart. Jessica replied harshly with no patience. "If you don't obey me, you and I will lose everything. Do you want to live miserably with your poor grandmother and your invalid father?" I was there, my heart tight, feeling as if someone was crushing my chest. The glass in my hand trembled, water spilling out. Jessica, whom I once considered a daughter, was now forcing her own 8-year-old daughter to lie to betray her own father. Rage consumed me, but along with it, an indescribable sorrow. Sarah, my granddaughter, whom I love like my own blood, was being pushed by her mother into a cruel choice. Silently, I stepped back. I returned to my room before they could discover me. Sitting on the bed, I covered my face with my hands, trying to hold back the tears that were streaming down. I thought of Michael, of how he used to carry Sarah on his shoulders, laughing as she pointed to the stars in the sky. "Grandma, I want to be an astronaut," Sarah had said, her eyes shining. Michael hugged her and whispered, "You're going to make it, honey. Your daddy believes in you." Now Jessica wanted to take that love away, to turn Sarah into a piece in her plan. I couldn't allow it. I couldn't let my granddaughter grow up with lessons of lies and cruelty. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, I got up early, made breakfast as usual. Michael was still asleep, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken from so many sleepless nights. I watched him through the crack in the door, and the pain tore me apart. But I knew that day I had to act, not just for Michael, but for Sarah, too. I called the girl to the backyard, where the orange tree loaded with fruit scented the air. Sarah came out with red eyes, her blue dress stained as if she had been crying all night. I sat on the wooden bench and pulled her to sit next to me. "Honey," I said in a soft voice, "last night I heard the conversation between you and your mom. You're very scared, aren't you?" Sarah looked at me, her lips trembling, and suddenly she burst into tears, hugging me tightly. "Grandma, I don't want to do that," she sobbed. Her crying broke my soul. "I don't want to leave Daddy. I don't want to lie. I just want to be with Daddy and you." I hugged her tight, feeling her small shoulders shake in my arms. My tears fell silently, but I kept my voice firm. "Don't be afraid, Sarah. Your grandma is here. You won't have to lie to anyone. The truth is our most powerful weapon. Remember that." Sarah lifted her face. Her clear eyes, full of tears, looked at me intently. "But Mom says if I don't do what she wants, she won't let me see Daddy," she whispered fearfully. I dried her tears, my heart aching, but full of determination. "Your mom is wrong," I said with certainty. "No one can take you away from your daddy or your grandma. I promise you we will get through this, just like your daddy and I have overcome so many difficulties." Sarah nodded, squeezed my hand, and at that moment I felt a new strength awaken in me. I was fighting not just for Michael, but also for my granddaughter, so she wouldn't grow up surrounded by deceit and fear. After that night, I overheard the conversation between Jessica and Sarah. My heart burned with a fire of anger and pain. I couldn't let my daughter-in-law turn my granddaughter into a pawn in her cruel plan, but I knew that hurtful words or direct confrontations wouldn't be enough to protect Michael and Sarah. I needed proof. I needed a truth sharp enough to break the armor Jessica had built. And that's how I decided to go to an old acquaintance from a life I thought I had buried, Robert Medina, an experienced private investigator who had once been my ally in the days when I myself faced the courts. Robert's office was hidden in a small alley in Chicago where the smell of old tobacco mixed with untold secrets. The room was tiny, lit only by an old desk lamp filled with yellowish folders and black and white photographs. When I pushed the door open and entered, Robert was sitting behind the desk, a half-smoked cigarette in his hand. When he saw me, he jumped up, his eyes wide with surprise. "Linda," he exclaimed in a voice hoarse from the smoke. "My God, how many years has it been? I thought you had completely retired." I smiled coldly, though inside I felt a dull ache. My past life, those days when they called me the Queen of Law, were now just a distant memory. But today I had to return to it for my son and granddaughter. I sat in the wooden chair across from Robert and told him in broad strokes Michael's story. The accident, the change in Jessica, the divorce lawsuit, and the plan to force Sarah to lie. Robert listened in silence, nodding his gaze sharp again, like an old wolf smelling its prey. "I understand," he said, in a low tone. "Leave it to me, but be prepared, Linda. Sometimes the truth hurts more than suspicion." I nodded firmly, clenching my hands. "I'm ready, Robert. I just need the truth, however painful it may be." A few days later, Robert met me in a small, lonely coffee shop on the outskirts. When I arrived, he was already sitting in a secluded corner with a cup of black coffee in front of him and a thin folder on the table. He pushed the folder towards me without saying a word. I opened it and felt my heart stop. The photos inside were clear. Jessica in a striking red dress on the arm of a burly, elegant man coming out of a luxurious hotel on the Gold Coast. She was smiling radiantly, her eyes shining a far cry from the cold, bitter face she showed to Michael. I took the photos with trembling hands, feeling as if ice was being poured down my chest. "His name is William Harris," Robert murmured in a grave voice. "A real estate mogul known for seducing women with properties only to take their assets later. He has an army of lawyers and powerful contacts who cover everything up." I looked at a photo where Jessica was wearing a sparkling bracelet I had never seen before. "This isn't a fling," Robert continued. "He picks her up, pays all her bills from luxury restaurants to expensive dresses. I suspect this is a calculated plan, Linda. She wants Michael's house, and William is behind it." My heart filled with pain and rage. While Michael fought against every spasm of pain trying to take steps with his damaged legs, Jessica, the wife he loved so much, was enjoying herself with another man, planning to take away the home my son had built with his whole life. I thought of the nights Michael stared out the window with empty eyes, and I wanted to scream against so much injustice. "How far has she gone with him?" I asked, my voice broken with suppressed fury. Robert sighed and shook his head. "Very far, Linda. I found hotel receipts, plane tickets, and even bank transfers from William's account to hers. This isn't just a romance, it's a business." I paid Robert, asking him to keep watching. "I need all the proof I can get, no matter how small," I told him in a firm voice. Robert nodded with a look full of understanding. "You're still the same Linda I knew," he said. "Tough as steel, but be careful, William is not an easy man to confront." I smiled coldly, but deep down, I knew I had no other choice. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a battle to protect my family. That night, I hid the envelope with the photos in the locked drawer of my room. I didn't want Michael to see them. I didn't want him to face the truth that his wife had betrayed him so brazenly. Michael had already suffered enough the accident, Jessica's insults, the pitying looks from people. I couldn't let another stab wound break his heart. During dinner, Jessica appeared dressed as ostentatiously as ever. She sat at the table and very naturally proposed. "Mom, I think we should sell this house and move to a more comfortable luxury apartment. Living here is getting boring, don't you think?" I looked her straight in the eye with a cutting coldness. "This house is the result of Michael's hard work," I said in a calm but sharp voice. "It's not something you can sell on a whim." Jessica tensed her lips, moving as if she wanted to reply, but she just kept quiet and started serving food to Sarah. I looked at Sarah and saw her little eyes avoiding mine, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. She knew too much, but she was too young to carry that weight. Seeing her, a new strength was born in me, not only to protect Michael, but also to shield Sarah's innocence from the scars her mother was trying to leave on her. The morning of the first hearing, it was drizzling. The drops fell crookedly like my own tears. I helped Michael out of the old car, each of his steps heavy, not just because of the wooden crutch, but also because of the invisible burden on his shoulders. His face was gaunt, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights, but he still gave me a weak smile so I wouldn't worry. "Mom, I'm okay," he said, though his voice trembled, and I knew he was trying to hide the pain. I squeezed his hand tightly, trying to pass on some of my strength, though inside my heart ached thinking about what was to come. On the other side of the courthouse, a luxury car screeched to a halt. Jessica got out, proudly dressed in a sparkling emerald green dress, a triumphant smile on her lips, as if victory was already assured. Her parents and her brother followed, laughing and talking loudly, as if they were going to a party instead of a trial. Seeing it, my stomach churned. They didn't understand the years of Michael's sacrifice to build this home. They didn't see the sleepless nights I spent protecting my family. To them, it was all a game, and Michael the easy prey. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with the smell of old wood and tension. Michael sat on the plaintiff's bench, gripping his crutch tightly, his gaze fixed on the floor as if wanting to escape all the stares. I stood behind him silently, waiting for my moment. Jessica took the defendant's bench, crossing her legs, her heels tapping the floor, each tap a mockery. She looked at Michael coldly, without a hint of emotion, as if he were no longer her husband. Jennifer Rivers. Jessica's lawyer stood up. Her firm voice echoed throughout the room. Your Honor, my client, Mrs. Jessica Torres, has had to endure an unsustainable life alongside a disabled husband for many years. Mr. Michael Villaseñor is no longer able to work. He does not have the health to fulfill the role of a husband and father. We request a divorce and the division of assets, including half the value of the house they have shared during their life together. Every word she spoke was like a stab in my heart. I wanted to stand up to scream that they were distorting the truth, but I held back, gripping the old leather briefcase tightly. Jessica nodded, adding a venomous phrase, her voice filled with contempt. He's nothing but a burden. I deserve a better life, not serving someone who is worthless. Those words were a direct blow to Michael. He tried to stand up, his trembling hands leaning on his crutches, his voice broken with emotion. I can still take care of my daughter. I'm still Sarah's father. But his throat closed up, unable to finish the sentence. His face turned red, sweat ran down his forehead, and I saw his eyes fill with tears, as if all the strength he had left was crumbling. Jessica's sarcastic laugh erupted, cruel, icy. Look at yourself, Michael. You can't even stand up. Who do you think you're going to take care of? The entire room murmured. Pitying glances were fixed on my son. I felt my heart tearing apart. Michael, the son who was once my pride, now humiliated in front of everyone, called useless by the woman who claimed to love him. The scales of justice seemed to be tipping in Jessica's favor, and I knew if I didn't act, everything Michael had sacrificed would be lost. In that instant, I stood up. I walked calmly to the defense table. I opened the old leather briefcase. The sound of the zipper echoed sharply in the silent room. I placed it on the table. I pulled a chair next to Michael, feeling my son's astonished gaze. I took a deep breath. Then I stood up. My voice, clear and firm, resonated. From this moment on, I, Linda Villaseñor, will be the legal representative of my son, Mr. Michael Villaseñor. The entire room fell silent, as if time had stopped. Jennifer was petrified, her eyes wide with astonishment. Jessica stared at me, her mouth agape. Her face turned pale, as if she had seen a ghost from the past. The older people in the room began to murmur. Some whispered, "Linda Villaseñor, could it be?" I felt the wave of surprise spread, but I kept my eyes fixed on Judge Morales, who did not take his eyes off me. The judge gently tapped his gavel, his voice trembling, filled with doubt and respect. "Mrs. Linda Villaseñor, are you by any chance the Queen of Law?" That question swept through the room like a wind, unleashing a general murmur. Michael looked at me, his eyes wet, incredulous, as if for the first time he was discovering that his mother was not just a mother. The elderly present began to nod, murmuring among themselves about the stories of the past, about the woman who once made rival lawyers tremble. I nodded, my voice firm. "Your Honor, I have never stopped believing in justice." Those words were not just for the judge, but also for me, for Michael, and for those who looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and respect. I felt the strength of past days awaken within me, as if the flame I thought had long been extinguished was rekindling. I looked at Jessica and saw her flinch. The triumphant smile on her lips had vanished. Jennifer, who was once my friend, lowered her head as if she knew she was facing an opponent she could not underestimate. At the next hearing, the atmosphere in the courtroom was as tense as a rope about to snap. The room was packed, reporters with pens ready, curious neighbors all drawn by the news that the Queen of Law had returned. a rumor that had spread like wildfire throughout Chicago. I walked in holding Michael's hand, feeling my son's trembling hand gripping my arm. He said nothing, but in his tired eyes a spark of hope shone. I squeezed his hand gently, wanting to tell him I was there and that I would not let anyone take what was rightfully his. Jessica was sitting on the defendant's bench, dressed with her usual elegance, though her customary smile no longer had the same shine. Beside her, Jennifer Rivers. Her lawyer looked tense, clutching a stack of documents as if they were her last resort. Jessica's family, her parents, and her brother occupied the bench behind, but their laughter and loud comments from the previous day had disappeared, replaced by nervous, conspiratorial glances. I knew they, too, felt the tide was turning, though they didn't yet understand what was coming. Judge Morales entered with his usual solemn bearing. He gestured for me to begin. I stood up, opened my old leather briefcase, and took out a packet of carefully arranged documents. "Your Honor," I said in a clear, firm voice, "I present as the first piece of evidence the property documents for the house located on the outskirts of Chicago. All records clearly indicate that this house was purchased by and is in the name of my son, Michael Villaseñor, 2 years before his marriage to Mrs. Jessica Torres." I placed the papers on the table one by one like laying bricks to build a wall of truth. The court clerk took the documents. He reviewed them in detail and nodded, confirming their authenticity. Judge Morales looked at them. He nodded too, and a slight gesture of approval escaped his sharp gaze. The room erupted in murmurs, the rumors spreading like a wave. The faces of Jessica's parents turned pale. Her brother lowered his head, and Jessica clenched her fists, biting her lips to contain her rage. Jennifer immediately stood up. Her voice still tried to sound haughty, though it was already trembling. "Your Honor, although the house may be considered separate property during the years of cohabitation, it became the family residence. According to the marriage laws of this state, this fact can be taken into account for the division of property." I interrupted her with a harsh voice, giving her no room to continue. "Mrs. Rivers, the law is very clear. Common residence does not change the right of ownership over a property acquired before the marriage. This house is the untouchable asset of my son." The atmosphere in the room grew even tenser. Under the table, Michael squeezed my hand tightly, and I felt the warmth of his tremor. I looked at him, and in his eyes that spark of hope shone again, as if for the first time in a long time he believed we could win. But I knew the property papers were just the first step. I didn't give them time to react, and I launched the second piece of evidence. A small USB drive containing something capable of shaking the entire trial. "Your Honor," I said in a calm but cutting voice, "I want to present a recording made the night before the first hearing." I handed the USB to the clerk, and when the recording began to play, the entire room fell silent. Jessica's voice was heard loud, harsh, and cruel. "Sarah, listen carefully. Tomorrow in court, if the judge asks, you have to say that your daddy can't take care of you anymore. You have to say you don't want to live with a sick person. Understand?" Then Sarah's sob was heard. "But I don't want to lie, Mom. I love Daddy very much." Then Jessica's voice hardened without mercy. "If you don't do as I say, we'll lose everything. Do you want to live miserably with your poor grandmother and your invalid father?" The room was frozen. All eyes between astonishment and indignation were fixed on Jessica. She jumped up, her eyes wide, screaming, "That's false! She made it all up to defame me!" But her voice trembled, and I saw Jennifer put a hand on her shoulder, asking her to be quiet. Judge Morales raised his hand and ordered, "Order in the court. I want to hear from the direct witness. Call the child Sarah Villaseñor to the stand." Sarah entered with hesitant steps, her eyes swollen from crying but clean and clear. Seeing her, my heart broke. She was only 8 years old, and she already had to stand between truth and lies. Jessica leaned forward, her voice sweet but laden with pressure. "Sarah, tell everyone you want to be with me, right?" The entire room held its breath, waiting for her answer. Sarah lifted her tear-filled face. She looked directly at Judge Morales, and with a clear and determined voice, though trembling with emotion, she said, "I love my daddy. I'm not going to lie. I want to be with my daddy and my grandma." The room exploded. There were murmurs, and among them some discreet applause from strangers. Michael burst into tears, hiding his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. I looked at him and I saw that his tears were not of pain, but of the fragile happiness of knowing his daughter still loved him. Jessica turned pale and screamed in desperation. "The child is being manipulated. That woman brainwashed her." Her shrill voice found no ears. I approached, hugged Sarah's fragile shoulders, and held her against my chest. I looked Jessica straight in the eye and said coldly, "The truth cannot be manipulated, Jessica." And the child chose the truth. Sarah snuggled into me, clinging to my clothes with her small hands as if I were her only refuge. Judge Morales banged the gavel again and again to calm the room, but I knew the course of the trial had already completely changed. Jennifer bowed her head, unable to refute anything. Jessica's family remained motionless, their eyes filled with shame. I looked around and saw compassionate faces, heads bowing in a sign of respect. Suddenly, Jessica stood up again, her eyes crazed and her shrill voice cutting through the silence. "Don't believe her. She's nothing but a failed lawyer. She lost a major case so humiliatingly that she had to abandon her profession. Who can trust someone like that?" Her words exploded like a bomb. The entire room stirred the murmurs growing like a wave. Some reporters were writing hastily, their pens scratching the paper. I looked at Michael, who lowered his head, gripping his crutches tightly, as if fearing my past would ruin everything we had achieved. Sarah beside me squeezed my hand tightly, her clear eyes reflecting pure worry. I took a deep breath, feeling my chest burn. Jessica's words were not just a blow to my honor, but also a desperate attempt to shake the confidence of Michael and Sarah. But I was not afraid. I had faced more venomous insults than that, and I learned to turn pain into strength. I stood up, walked to the defense table, and fixed my gaze on Judge Morales. My voice sounded strangely calm, but each word was as sharp as a razor. "Yes, I left the law, but not because I was weak. Many years ago, I lost an important case, and it wasn't due to a lack of skill or evidence, but because my ex-husband and his wealthy lover bribed the judge. Every document, every argument of mine was flawless, but the final verdict was a blatant distortion of justice. My honor was buried under dirty money, and I decided to retire to preserve my dignity." The room fell into absolute silence. All eyes were on me no longer with curiosity or pity, but with deep empathy. Michael lifted his head, his eyes filled with tears, looking at me as if for the first time he understood the whole truth of what I had been through. I felt Sarah squeeze my hand tighter, and I knew my words were not only defending my honor, but also showing my son and granddaughter that I had never bowed to injustice. I continued speaking, my voice firm without trembling. That judge years later was investigated and sentenced to prison on multiple charges of bribery, and I from that day on swore that I would never again allow justice to be tarnished. Today I am here not for fame, but for my son, for my granddaughter, and for the truth our family deserves. I paused, observing the room, and saw the slow nods of the elders who had heard of me of the Queen of Law from another time. Just then, Judge Morales leaned forward, gently tapped his gavel, and his eyes shone with a respect that was impossible to hide. "I can attest to Mrs. Villaseñor's words," he said in a grave and firm voice. "Many years ago, when I was just a young lawyer, it was Linda who defended me in a similar case. She has been the person who has valued the truth and the law more than anyone I have ever known." His words swept through the room like a wind, awakening murmurs of admiration. The reporters wrote hurriedly, and some whispered, "The Queen of Law has truly returned." I looked at Jessica. She was staggering as if about to fall apart. Her pale face, her tight lips no longer held the pride of before. Jennifer, her lawyer, just lowered her head and aimlessly flipped through documents as if accepting defeat. Jessica's family remained motionless, their eyes filled with shame, unable to look me in the face. I turned to Michael and saw him watching me with tears running silently down his cheeks. "Mom," he murmured with a broken voice, I put my hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently, as if to tell him I wouldn't let him fall apart. Judge Morales stood up. His voice resonated with clarity. "The court will take a recess. The final verdict will be given at the next hearing." The sharp bang of the gavel sounded loud, like a final period to the truth that had just come to light. When we left the courtroom, the crowd parted to let us pass. Some strangers approached murmuring, "She is so strong. Justice has finally spoken." An old woman took my hand, her eyes filled with tears. "Thank you, Linda. You have restored our faith that the truth still has value." On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed. There was no longer even standing room. Reporters, neighbors, and even strangers from all over Chicago had come as if the entire city was holding its breath, waiting for the outcome of a story that had shaken every corner. I walked in holding Michael's hand. I felt his trembling fingers clutching my arm. Sarah was by our side. Her clear eyes reflected worry, and her small hand squeezed mine tightly, as if she were afraid of getting lost. I smiled at her, trying to calm her, although inside my heart was pounding violently, as if I were at a crossroads of destiny. Jessica sat on the defendant's bench, her face pale without her former pride. Her elegant dress now seemed out of place, like a shell that could no longer hide her defeat. Jennifer, her lawyer, was beside her, her gaze lowered and her hands clenched as if trying to hold on to the last shreds of dignity. Jessica's family, her parents and brother, were also present, but they no longer laughed or talked as before. Their nervous, fleeting glances revealed that they knew the storm had arrived, and they had nowhere to hide. Judge Morales entered, imposing, filling the room with solemnity. He sat in the main chair, his sharp eyes scanning every person. The silence was total, only the rustling of papers and the held breath of the audience could be heard. He cleared his throat, and his grave voice sounded like a hammer blow of fate. After reviewing all the evidence and testimony, the court delivers the following verdict. The divorce between Mrs. Jessica Torres and Mr. Michael Villaseñor is granted. The full ownership of the house on the outskirts of Chicago remains with Michael Villaseñor, as it is a property acquired before the marriage. The custody of the minor, Sarah Villaseñor, is awarded to her father, Michael Villaseñor, and her grandmother, Mrs. Linda Villaseñor. Mrs. Jessica Torres will receive no financial benefits and may only visit her daughter under judicial supervision. The room erupted. Whispers and restrained applause came from all sides. Michael broke down in tears, collapsing on my shoulder, his thin body trembling as if a heavy weight had finally been lifted. Sarah ran into our arms, hugging us tightly, her tears soaking my clothes. "Grandma, Dad, I'm staying with you," she sobbed in a broken voice mixed with relief and joy. I hugged them with all my might, feeling the warmth of the two people I loved most. Tears streamed down my face, but they were not of pain. They were of happiness, of relief, of knowing that our family was safe. Jessica jumped up, her face twisted with rage, screaming uncontrollably. "It's not fair! I'm going to appeal! You can't do this to me!" Her shrill voice echoed, but no one paid her any attention. Jennifer put a hand on her shoulder and murmured, "It's useless, Jessica. We've already lost." She took a few staggering steps, as if her strength had completely abandoned her. Her family stood up silently, heads bowed, and left the room without daring to face the contemptuous looks surrounding them. I watched them go without feeling a gram of satisfaction. I only felt sadness. Sadness for Jessica, who was once my daughter-in-law, part of our family, but who chose the path of betrayal and ambition. A few days later, I heard the neighbors say that William, the real estate mogul behind Jessica, had cut all communication with her as soon as he learned she had lost the case. He no longer picked her up or paid her luxurious bills. Jessica had to live alone in a rented, rundown apartment on the outskirts, pointed at and rejected by everyone. One morning, Mrs. Davis, the market vendor, whispered to me, "Linda, I saw her packing her things. No one knows where she went, as if she wanted to run away from it all." I nodded, saying nothing, but deep down I only wished that Jessica would find a new path, although I knew she would have to live with what she had caused. Meanwhile, Michael, Sarah, and I began a new life under the roof we loved so much. I devoted my time to taking Michael to his rehabilitation therapies, watching him slowly regain his self-confidence. At first he was still shy, but every time Sarah ran to him, hugged him and shouted, "Daddy, you're my superhero!" I would see Michael's eyes light up as if a spark of hope was rekindled. I helped Sarah with her homework. We drew colorful pictures together, and every night the kitchen was filled with the aroma of the dishes I prepared. Family meals, which had once been overshadowed by Jessica, were now filled with laughter. Sarah told stories from school. Michael teased her playfully, and I would just sit there watching the two beings I loved most with a warm heart, as if a storm had never passed. One sunny afternoon, I saw Sarah secretly take my old high heels from the closet, put them on, and walk unsteadily, posing like a lawyer. "Grandma, when I grow up, I'm going to be as good as you," she shouted, and then burst into laughter. Michael, sitting on the porch chair, watched her with eyes full of happiness and rebirth. I sat next to my son and granddaughter, looking at the orange tree loaded with fruit in the garden, and whispered, "Justice sometimes sleeps, but it never dies. It just waits for brave hearts to awaken it." Michael took my hand, his voice choked. "Mom, I don't know what I would have done without you. Thank you for everything." I smiled and gently squeezed my son's hand. "I only did what any mother would do," I replied, although inside I knew I had done much more. I had fought not only for Michael and Sarah, but also for myself, for the promise I made in the darkest days that I would never allow justice to be trampled. The bells of the church in the nearby downtown square began to ring, but this time the sound was clear, serene, like a blessing for our family. I looked up at the blue Chicago sky with sunbeams shining through the tree branches. After the storm, we had found peace. This house, which was once the center of the battle, was now a true home. The place where Michael was regaining his strength, where Sarah was growing up, surrounded by love, and where I, Linda Villaseñor, knew that I had fulfilled my promise to my son and granddaughter. I stayed there next to those I loved most, and for the first time in many years, I felt that my heart was truly at peace. After everything I've been through, I realized that life can take many things from us: our health, our trust, even the relationships that seemed strongest. But there is something no one can take from us: truth and love. They became the light that guided me, giving me the courage to face betrayal and injustice. I want everyone to understand that in life there will always be moments when we are tested to our limits. But if we keep the faith and do not bow our heads to lies, justice will eventually speak. And most importantly, family is the greatest strength to overcome any storm. The story you have just heard has had names and places changed to protect the identity of the people involved. We don't tell it to judge, but in the hope that someone will listen and stop to reflect. How many mothers are suffering in silence within their own homes, I truly wonder. If you were in my place, what would you do? Would you choose to remain silent to keep the peace, or would you dare to face it all to reclaim your voice? I want to know your opinion, because every story can become a candle that lights the way for others. God always blesses, and I am sure that courage will lead us to better days. Right now, on the end screen, I will leave 2 of the most beloved stories from the channel. I'm convinced they will surprise you. Thank you for staying with me until the